What's up guys, I'm Sean. Today we're installing these springs and camber bolts on Kevin's Subaru BRZ. The car is pretty much brand new and the shocks are brand new, so that's why we're going with lowering springs. I highly recommend going with springs and shocks if you have high mileage on your car, but ultimately I recommend coilovers, so the springs and shocks are set to match each other and you can adjust the height and the deafening. Springs are a great way to lower the car, get better handling and looks for not much money. We're going with the Race Comp Engineering springs and the SPC Camber bolts. You're going to need spring compressors, which you could rent or buy. Power tool is helpful, tool set, and jack and jack stands. Use a 17 to remove the sway bar in link. Use a 12mm to remove the brake line hose from the bracket. Use a flathead screwdriver, push in the tab and pull off the ABS sensor wires. And then use a 19-inch socket and open end to remove the bolts from the strut. Here's an example of how you get more camber on this car. So we're going to move the top bolt and use the bottom bolt, which is skinnier, and move it to the top. And then we're going to put the SPC camber bolt on the bottom. Now we're going to go to the top, remove the 12mm nuts. Then we're going to go back to the bottom and pull out the bolts. And then we'll go out the assembly, remove the sway bar end link, and the whole thing comes out. Now use a bungee cord, hold the brake rotor in place so there's no stress on the brake line. Remove the dust cover, remove the 14mm nut. But we have to compress the spring first, otherwise the nut can shoot out and be very dangerous. With the spring compressor mostly down and the spring is loose, now we can adjust the top nut. Use a 14mm and an Allen key and remove the top nut. Assembly pulls off. And then we're going to remove the spring. And then we're going to remove the spring compressor. Here are the two springs side by side. The springs come with a shorter bump stop. Pull the factory one off and replace it with the shorter one. Now reuse the factory dust boot and install the new spring onto the strut. Make sure you align the bottom of the spring to the right groove of the strut. The top as well. Now we're going to put the top hat assembly on, and we're going to have to put the 14mm nut back on. Luckily we don't have to compress the spring since it's shorter, so I have Kevin press down on it and I hand tighten the nut before I tighten it down. Confirm the springs are lined up correctly, and then we're going to torque the top nut to 41 foot-pounds. Put the cover on, and look at the dot on the top of the hat. It points towards the rear of the car, and we're going to install the assembly back into the car. For now, just loosely install the 12mm nuts. So we're going to start putting things back together. Reinstall the hub back into the strut assembly. Reinstall the bolts. The SPC bolt goes on the bottom with the tab facing out for negative camber. And again, we're going to have to get alignment, but this is just temporary. Reinstall the sway bar end link. Reinstall the ABS wire with the push-in clips. Reinstall the nuts on the strut bolts. The SPC nut is slightly smaller. Reinstall the 12mm nut holding the brake hose. Now we're going to torque the shock tower nuts to 17 foot-pounds. We're going to run down the nuts and bolts before we torque it down. We're going to torque the sway bar end link to 34 foot-pounds. The OEM top nut to 114 foot-pounds. The SPC camber bolt to 97 foot-pounds. And the brake hose to 24 foot-pounds. The front driver's side is done. We're going to move to the passenger side and then move to the rear of the car. So now we're at the rear passenger side. We're going to move the sway bar end link nut with a 14mm, the strut with a 17mm, and then we're going to pull the bolt out. You might have to tap on the strut bolt and then pull it out. Now inside the trunk, we peel back these covers, moving the tab with a flathead screwdriver. Then exposes the 14mm nuts, and we loosen these. Now have your helper step down on the hub assembly while you wiggle it out and remove it from the car. The rear struts are different from the fronts because the top hat doesn't spin, so make sure the top strut bolts are parallel to the bottom hose, so when you reassemble it, it's going to be a lot easier. Similar to the fronts, we're going to have to use spring compressors. Compress the spring to relieve pressure, and then we can loosen the top nut off. Remove the top hats, remove the spring assembly, remove the spring compressors, And here are the springs side by side. Remove the factory bump stop and install the shorter bump stop that came with the kit, as well as the dust boot that came with the kit. I reinstall the spring, make sure that the bottom lines up to the right spot and the top lines up to the right spot of the top hat. Unlike the fronts, we're going to have to compress the springs, and then once it's compressed, we're going to reinsert the top nut, hand tighten it down, remove the spring compressors, and then torque the top strut nut to 41 foot-pounds. Now we're ready to put it back into the car, slide into the control arm, have the helper step down on the hub while we wiggle it in place. Make sure the strut is lined up and the bolt comes out of the top. Now reinstall the strut bolt and the sway bar bolt. Run down the nuts but don't tighten it yet. Back in the trunk, tighten the top nuts to 22 foot-pounds. With the suspension under load, tighten the strut nut to 59 foot-pounds. Sway bar inlink to 28 foot-pounds. So this side is done. Finish the other side and let's go for a test drive. Alright Kevin, what do you think about initial feedback on these springs?
Well, so far, just driving for a couple miles already, I do feel the car being a little bit lower. It should be approximately around 1 inch, and I do notice that difference. And it is a little bit stiffer than the stock suspensions.
So these springs are about 1 inch lower all around than stock, and it's about 60 pounds or so stiffer than stock. So that's not much difference. So that's why the ride still feels pretty good. It feels firmer, more sporty, but it doesn't feel harsh at all. No. So we're gonna drive it around a little bit more and give you some more feedback. Some railroad tracks right here. Yeah, that feels pretty good, not bad. So it's been about a week. Let's see if the car dropped a little bit more. So it's about 23 1/4. This is a little under 23. This is at 23 with the ground side even. 20. So it's settled, yeah. Now we're heading to the shop to go get an alignment. So we just finished the alignment. With the camber bolt, we can easily get negative 2.2 in the front. We could probably go more, but we didn't want to push it. The rear, there's no camber adjustment on the BRZ FRS. So the rear is negative 2.6 on one side, 1.8 on the other side. So that's really bad. So in the rear, we're gonna have to get rear lower control arms to dial in the rear camber. So that would be a mod coming up. So everything done, got the alignments. And then we're gonna head to Laguna Seca in a couple weeks. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.